This is Let's Talk Business with your host, Marc Ebinger. Now, here's Marc.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Business Podcast. Coming up on the show today, we're going to talk about content marketing for small businesses. This is one of my favorite topics. Obviously, I create a ton of content where I'm at, and the guy sitting across from me, Matt Nelson, is one of the reasons why. So in studio with us today is Matt Nelson, the owner of Peachtree Rose Marketing, Peachtree Rose Translation, and Skyline Missions Massage. Matt, of course, also owns the studio in which we are currently sitting. Magnificent build out. Matt, excited to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marc. Likewise. The podcast studio is not new to me, but every time I get in the hot seat is always a new feeling, so I appreciate it.
Do you do a lot of podcasting?
I do as a guest, and I'm getting into the host realm pretty soon.
Are you guesting mainly in person, or do you do a lot of virtual?
I actually loathe virtual podcasting for a number of reasons. Number one, you can't have the same connection you have with somebody in the room. There's not a lot of rapport building that can be had, off camera like you do here. But also, it just comes up better in terms of post. You'll have, clean audio versus filming from my webcam, and
the cat coming across the table, or the low quality imagery on one side. It drives me nuts.
It kills me. Yes, especially on the post production piece.
Yeah, and really, your pricing here is extremely, it's very fair. So people should at least reach out and check with you on that if they're thinking about podcasting. It's like, look, just get it DFY, done for you.
Yeah.
It's worth it as long as your content doesn't suck. I mean,
that's the big uphill battle.
Right?
For sure. Yeah.
You got to be good at what you're doing. Otherwise, it can be a little bit messy. But all right, cool. So I'm your host, Marc Ebinger, the owner of Crookus Virtual Staffing, a company that recruits and staffs experienced overseas administrative assistants for insurance agents and attorneys who need help with their administrative duties and all of that. Love staffing for folks. It's so low cost, so efficient. As entrepreneurs, we have challenges across the board, and we always need help with administrative tasks. We don't always have the budget for it, but when you can do it between $7 and $9 an hour, it's a huge leverage point. So if you're curious about the most common tasks that virtual assistants are doing for businesses, head over to our website at crookus.com and grab a list of the top 20 tasks that VAs are doing for businesses just like yours. The link is in the podcast description. A quick reminder to follow the Let's Talk Business podcast on all major podcast platforms and social media, where you can catch video versions of the show. You can get to everything easily from our website at satalkradio.com. All right, so Matt, happy Veterans Day, by the way.
Thank you. Likewise. Thank you for your service.
So give us a little bit about your background and how you ended up over here at Peachtree and starting that whole business venture.
It's a lot to unpack, but I'll try and I'll delve it down to the bullet points. So,
Roger that.
So oddly enough, and it's you hear the story a lot, in terms of entrepreneurship, people getting into entrepreneurship by way of the military. So that's kind of a part of the story for me as well. Some folks don't know, from the marketing perspective, they're like, oh, he's good at SEO, or he's good at this or that from a technical standpoint. But by trade, I'm a Mandarin linguist by way of the Army, taxpayer dollars. So I went through a private military academy for about 3 years. I was going to be originally an officer of Marines, and then I ended up transitioning to Army ROTC for a number of years. And then after 3 years of that, I decided I really wanted to experience what grunt life was like. I saw too many people commissioning, my upperclassmen, and I was like, well, they have no idea what it's like as an enlisted person, as an NCO. At the time, my idea was, I'll join, I'll enlist, and then I'll move up through the ranks pretty easily, right? Because when you're in your early 20s, you know exactly, the best route you should go. Black and white, probably not a great decision, but that decision, paid dividends because of the way I played my cards. So I did enlist Army, and then shortly thereafter took the D-Lab, the Defense Language Aptitude Battery. It's an assessment that, gauges an English heritage speaker, their ability to learn a foreign language. Did really well on that. I got a list of languages, in terms of an opportunity that I could learn. And I turned down a $40,000 bonus to learn Pashto at the time. This is 2008, 2009, that time frame. Global war on terrorism was still hot and heavy, with a lot of upside to go on that in terms of opportunity if you're, enlisting. But I turned it down, not because I didn't want to go to Afghanistan, but because I knew at some point that mission set would end, and I knew there was going to be opportunity elsewhere. So I chose Chinese Mandarin as a language to learn. So about 74 weeks out at the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California. Very intensive immersion program. We started out in our classroom size, about 6, but the overall class, started over 30, about 35 people. We ended at about 12. So attrition rate, was a little heavy there. But after about a year and a half of that, I was super excited. I thought I was going to be able to use that skill set for the first time as a soldier. They sent me to Korea, and I used absolutely no Chinese while I was there. So I was there for about a year and a half. But during that time frame, a buddy of mine approached me, and he's like, Matt, I really need your help. It's translation. I was like, okay, sweet. Finally get to use my skill set, taxpayer dollars at work here, but it had nothing to do with the Army, unfortunately. It was a stack of documents he brought me, and he's like, hey, I'm getting married to my fiance in a few months. These are her documents. I need them translated. Can you help me out? I was like, okay, that sounds cool. I was still excited. I look at it for about a half second, and I'm like, man, Rowan, that's his name. It's like, I can't help you with this. This is like Thai or a Khmer, Cambodian or something. It's not Mandarin. And he gives me this weird look, and he's like, but is it close? I was like, no, man, like not at all. Not all Asian languages are the same. They're not all Chinese. But I was able to work with a buddy of mine back stateside, bridge the connection. He translated the documents, and he went on to successfully get married for the first of a few times.
Oh.
So blazing success story, but that gave me an idea, an entrepreneurial idea. I thought it was a novel concept, but I was like, okay, I'm here in Korea. What can I do as an entrepreneur on kind of my downtime? So it wasn't going to be a translator in Korea, because that doesn't really work out when you're active duty. But I decided I'd build a website, a web-based translation agency, and I started from the ground up. That got me, hot and heavy as a business owner, learning digital marketing, in particular web design and search engine optimization. And the real thing that caught the entrepreneurial bug wasn't when I started out, but it was the first transaction. It was the first time I made $1 online using PayPal, and it wasn't from your mom, your dad, cousin, or a friend. It's from some complete stranger who found me through Google, and that's why I knew something was working, and I caught the bug then. When you flash forward a few years, that business, I ended up selling the back end of that business. I built a robust platform on the back end that allowed freelance translators to basically connect with a client in real time over a project, which is a nice feature. It's a great nice to have. I learned a lot more about marketing, and one of the biggest pieces in marketing is understanding value propositions that matter the most to the people using them. Not necessarily features or nice to haves, but the actual benefits and what people want. I ended up selling that piece of the business to somebody else, and I rebranded to Peachtree Rose Translations. And that business in November of 2021, all of that's run through virtual assistants. So currency arbitrage, we can unpack some of that too. But freelance translators worldwide, and it's all done over email. Because at the end of the day, the consumer wants something that's low cost, it's quality as a translation, and they want it fast. Bueno, barato, y bonito, you usually can't have the three of them. You can usually choose two, right? But at the end of the day, that's what most people want, and they don't necessarily care about all of the back-end stuff. They don't want to get in depth on that. And then in that business, I decided I need someone to really focus on the marketing and push that full-time, and it can't be me because I was still doing stuff in federal service. So instead of hiring a marketing professional or another agency, I ended up creating a new entity altogether. So I created Peachtree Rose Marketing, completely separate entity, originally with the focus of just adding fuel to the fire for that company, but really got into my passion now, which is working with startups and small businesses and making sure they're scaling correctly in terms of marketing, and they're focusing on marketing channels that work best for them, not necessarily just where they can throw some money. Because I see so many who mess up throwing money at paid ads, and they don't even understand their target audience.
The problem that I've dealt with a lot of entry-level business owners as well, right? It's hand to mouth a lot, and it's solopreneurs, and everything is it's feast and famine kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So when it comes to marketing, there's hesitation a lot of times, right? And I think that for business owners like yourself and myself who are in B2B services, if you can use overseas virtual assistants to run important aspects of your business so you can keep that cost low and affordable, you've got a really good competitive angle there. And that's something that I really enjoy. When I started doing my business, I was looking at, I want something where I can get some cash up front, and I want recurring revenue, and I want it to be something that once they have it, they don't want to let it go.
Yeah.
Right? They want to keep that service for as long as they can, right?
Absolutely.
So that's that's the spirit behind what I'm doing here. What has been your experience when it comes to marketing to these entry-level business owners, or maybe business owners that are under $500,000 a year, for example? What's the reception? Are they resistant to this idea of marketing, and how do you overcome that?
That's a great question. That's been an uphill battle, and we've fine-tuned it quite a bit, and understanding, number one, our target audience and kind of how to approach them. No marketing and ad agency wants to admit the best form of marketing is referral marketing. That's when somebody else says, hey, they did great by me, I trust them, which is the know, like, trust factor, right? But I think you should go see them and speak with them. So we ourselves get a lot of referral marketing from our clients, our existing clients, which is great as long as they're the right fit. And sometimes they're not. And I think for me, one of the biggest things as an entrepreneur to learn early on is not saying yes to everything. Zig Ziglar said cash flow is like oxygen for a business, and that's absolutely true. But to an extent, I think there's a balance there. You can't just say yes because you want the cash and you want to be able to make it work. We've got a few core services. Everything else we rely on referral partnerships for. And a big part of that is not saying yes to everything. If you want to do this amazing, cool dancing doctors on TikTok footage, we're probably not the marketing company for you that wants to hire an influencer. We're not influencer marketing. That's not us, but we can point you in the right direction. But I think, for people who aren't necessarily your target audience in business, being able to give them value still means a lot, because they typically remember that. You don't have to have a transaction to build rapport with somebody and still maintain some sort of a potential referral partnership. So hopefully that answers that a little bit.
What's your ideal client profile? I mean, what are you looking for as you're doing this good fit, not a good fit analysis?
To be honest, I like to diversify the client portfolio. We've got franchises who typically already have some sort of a, quote, marketing solution. There's some sort of a cookie cutter idea that corporate has come up with for franchises. It's not regionalized. It's not localized. It doesn't necessarily speak to the target audience in any particular market. We've got creative solutions that are tailored for those types of clients, and usually those are bigger dollar clients. And then we've got folks who are salon owners in the beauty industry. And we've got tailored solutions for them as well. For me, it boils down to the individual, usually a business owner who we're conducting, a conversation with. If where I typically don't prefer working with, and where other, marketing companies usually love to work with, are, big box businesses that have other decision makers other than the owner involved. For me personally, I love being able to work with somebody who's a decision maker, and it's not a decision that's going to be passed around, in a democratic forum of, C-suite executives. Some of them are in favor of this marketing channel, others not, and it's not, it's a message or a strategy that's not necessarily carried out throughout the business. We've dealt with, law firms in the past where there were just too many decision makers in the room, and they were conflicting, and at the end of the day, it hampers down the actual project or what you're trying to do, or it might add to the timeline, or it might not be as effective in terms of a marketing solution.
Well, you got to sell the benefits to a whole room of people rather than just one person or maybe two people in a co-founder type situation. It is more complex. It's a different strategy. And maybe a different taste. Some people don't want to deal with that kind of situation. I like dealing with small business owners as well. But the flip side of that is budget, right? Because it's like, it's always not budget friendly, or it's start and then stop because I didn't realize that it was blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. So expectation management is a big part of it, right? And I've learned that along the way too in business, not just for this business, but other business ventures. But a big part of it is not just leading with value, and everybody loves to use the V word, right? Especially in marketing. Not just leading with value, but leading with expectation management, and beyond just the transactional proposal or service agreement, but actually making sure that your prospect, lead, client at this point understands what to expect from you from a timeline perspective, or deliverables, and as well what they can expect that they're going to need to do in that. Because sometimes you'll have clients who want to be completely hands-off, and it's great to understand that from the get-go. And other times you'll have people who really want to micromanage, and it might not be the best fit for your business.
Well, yeah, at the end of the day, if they're looking for a particular deliverable, right? I guess understanding why do they want the deliverable, make sure you understand the nuances of the deliverable, make sure that that deliverable is going to produce the value that they even think it's going to deliver, because sometimes it doesn't, right? And there might be a different strategy that needs to be kind of around that deliverable to make sure that you get the maximum value out of the deliverable.
Absolutely.
SEO is a good example of that. If somebody wants, hey, I want you to optimize, well, there's a lot of pieces and components to that, right? I mean, you need organic content creation that people are going to appreciate and actually value when they're checking out the business.
Yeah.
What do you see as like the biggest demand for content these days that actually can produce what people need in the form of SEO?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So 2024 leaning into 2025, it's a very well-positioned question with the advent of AI, ChatGPT right now. You've got so many business owners who are becoming over-reliant on AI, ChatGPT as a prime example, to produce what they feel like is content. And there's nothing wrong with AI. And I think, if you're not leveraging ChatGPT in your business, or, at least to the extent of, hey, that's my real-time assistant that I can always get and springboard ideas off of, you're going to be behind the times. But the detriment in terms of SEO is over-reliance, from a business owner perspective. And I just had this conversation with a blogger this morning who's working on something, and they were charged with not just writing content, but making sure that, from an SEO perspective, it's adding value. But they're not an SEO person. They're not necessarily a search engine optimization expert. They don't necessarily know what to ask. And I went through the process with them. What are you doing? And the answer was basically taking a transcript from a conversation, plugging that in and saying, now optimize for SEO. And unfortunately, that's just too ambiguous. It's not telling AI enough, and it's not making AI an expert on SEO. But to answer your question, one of the strongest levers in moving into 2025 and beyond, we're doing it right now. And that's content marketing that's not a Grant Cardone, nothing against 10X, right? It's not a Grant Cardone talking head video. It's a very conversational way of showing empathetic authority with, a potential prospect, but also showcasing yourself or your guest as an industry leader or authority figure in what they're doing. So podcasting, video podcasting in particular. There's so many things we can do. You've got an 8K camera. You've got another 3, 4K cameras right now. Sometimes you'll have a lot more than that with what you're doing. You've got all these cool angles, which is nice video content you could throw up on YouTube. And usually people just think of it as that. And that's where you're missing a lot of potential, right? If you've got a conversation with somebody and you're getting into the meat and potatoes of a lot of good SEO content, we're throwing around a lot of great keywords right now in terms of SEO. That transcript is powerful from an SEO perspective. That being in the second largest search engine in the world, YouTube, owned by the first, super powerful. And when you can really hone in on your 5,000 character description of that, podcast, and you can make sure that your title is correct, and you're doing the due diligence from an SEO perspective to understand your target audience, your target market, and really supply and demand from an SEO perspective. What that looks like is the supply of content that already exists on the internet and the demand, the actual search demand for specific keywords. What does that volume look like on a monthly, analytics report? How many people are searching for SEO agency near me or marketing for SEO in 2025 versus, a different keyword that you could use, and making sure that your content is speaking to that. There's a strategy that you can have in advance on a podcast to be able to map that out, but also on the back end, there's stuff that you can add to it. But not just doing a full length on YouTube. There's a lot of repurposed opportunity that can be had out of this. We have business owners who will come to us, hey, can you manage our social media? What are you looking to get out of it? In answer to your other question, expectation management, understanding what the deliverables mean to the business owner. But you could do a 60-minute interview with somebody and you can have potentially 6 months worth of different types of content. But from an SEO perspective, podcasting, in my opinion, is going to be the way to go, because you can do a lot more than just doing a blog article that's optimized for SEO. And at the end of the day, you're building a parasocial relationship with your audience. You're making that human connection. And that's something that's missed in the AI realm of marketing that I think people will grow a genuine distaste for moving forward.
Well, and that's the competitive side of what's going on too, because AI can detect AI, right? And in course, that's not even 100%.
Yeah.
But if people think they can just have AI generate stuff for them, whether it's posts, images, all of that's going to be flagged and all of it's going to be white noise. And so you're going to get pushed down the ladder when it comes to exposure. So creating authentic, organic content that's well planned is... the demand for that, I think, is going to go through the roof. And I think that content like this is going to become more valuable with the advent of things like AI.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you can have your full-length video podcast on YouTube and a bunch of other platforms too. But then you can have a very segmented piece of that 60 minutes that's 2 minutes that just talks about SEO on your blog article that talks about SEO. You can embed that content on your website. And on page, you can optimize, getting into technical SEO, search engine optimization. You can optimize that page for search. But the cool thing out of that, you really have 3 opportunities to show up in search. It's no longer just that page itself and its SEO value. You've also got the opportunity for that video that's housed in YouTube to show up organically for the same type of search on Google. You've got that video content in your website. Also, just that segment, the capability to show up organically in Google. So you're really hitting it from 3 new levers as opposed to the historic on-page SEO and just getting into just the technicalities of what that looks like, making sure those levers are good, and then getting the content there. It's a new form of getting the content and making it not just SEO friendly, but it's a lot more consumable. People no longer want to read a 2,000-word blog. It's great SEO value for the search engines that are just gathering it up using AI anyways. But people want to consume that 2-minute video that's on that page.
Yeah, and really what I'm finding is the start of that is your shorts, right? Your reels, anything less than 60 seconds. And then that leads to the rest of the stuff. So having that whole thing planned out starts before you even do your podcast. And that's why, partnering with a professional, if you're going to get a podcast done, is extremely valuable, but they have to see that. And if they plan for just even one podcast every other month, it's not going to kill your budget to do that and to do it right. But there's a piece in there that is a very difficult piece. And that is going into a podcast episode and pulling out these 2 to 5 minute segments. That's not easy. And this is from experience. It's not, the 60-second ones can be a little easier, especially in Descript, because it's a very visual way to do that. I enjoy that process myself. It's just not a good use of my time, but I enjoy that process. But those 2 to 5 minute clips now, and getting the hook in there, and then it's going to be easier, I think, to optimize because it's very on point on what you're talking about. But you have to, if somebody's going to do that for you, they're going to pull that out of a podcast episode. They have to understand the context. right? And they have to have a bit of a skill set when it comes
Yes.
to doing that. How do you solve that problem for a client?
So first, I'll start by saying, we're a full suite in what we do from the video podcasting realm. We've leaned further and further away from the podcast studio as a rental model, and we're building connections with would-be competitors in that space. We're building out SanAntonioPodcasting.com as a way of connecting not just local studios, but shows, hosts, if you want to be a guest on a podcast, if you're looking for guests on your podcast. And that will, of course, leverage virtual assistants as well to be able to give that capability to the host or the show, as well as the guest, and kind of get some of that going for them. But we're leaning away from that particular model because we want to be able to be a solution that gives people a lot more value. Not everybody is a Marc Ebinger who has a clear idea of how they're going to operate their show, how to execute the actual marketing strategy beyond that. We've had folks who come in with an idea of, yes, I want to do a podcast about this subject, but I don't absolutely know what I should get into or the right, content marketing strategy for how those shows should be lined out, which is why we've also built in some consultation into that and what we do. But we also get into the post-production and editing, the marketing of the content, which you kind of touched on from the social media aspect, getting those short-form videos out there as a hook, bringing people into the longer-form content, and then the actual, dissemination of the content and distribution in those channels. And not all of that's the same. You can go to a place and they don't do any of that. They just rent out a space and maybe rent out the equipment. Or they'll do some very, very high-end post-production editing, and now you've got all this content, and you've got to figure out what to do with it, how to market it. But in answer to your question, some of our process, we're leveraging AI. I know you and I have spoken about various tools that we're using, and we've both mutually kind of optimized our processes there. We're also using Descript for certain clients to pull some very quick versions of a transcript in a Word editable format, being able to say, okay, based on who's speaking into this mic, that's this person, and telling the transcript that. We're leveraging AI to be able to, condense that down to a show notes summary. But on this side, in parallel to that, we're also using actual skill sets, search engine optimization, to understand supply and demand as related to that show's content. To understand, okay, this person's talking about the beauty industry. They're talking about not just the beauty industry, but balayage, right? How important is that term, that keyword, in the beauty industry, really to the consumer? And out of that, where do we want to place that particular segment? But yeah, in answer to your question, if you're not using AI and different tools, you're really losing out. You're probably going to have to upcharge your customer in this particular, type of service, podcasting as a service. And that's where you get your $1,000 plus per episode from studios that are doing your organic, video podcasting. They're probably, they've got a sound engineer on board. We don't have a sound engineer because at the end of the day, in post-production and everything we built out and the type of equipment we use, you don't need one. You can run it for them, but you don't have to upcharge somebody for that. We're leveraging tools. We spend, $16,000 a month on software as a service for various marketing things that we do. Some of that boils down to podcasting tools like Descript, but we're leveraging not just automation and VAs, but also software as a service to be able to give people the best type of value add for our labor.
Well, something you mentioned that I really like is the fact that you're taking software and you're taking a look at the transcript and saying, okay, what's the supply and demand? What's going to perform the best because it's in the highest demand? I think that's incredible. AI has a problem when it comes to context. It's not very, very good at that. So at the end of the day, it's almost like you still need a human, maybe not on the 60-second clip so much once you have the hook, but on a 4-minute clip, you're gonna have proper. You got to have proper context. It's almost storytelling at that point. You got to have a beginning, middle, and end to that thing, and that's not always easy to do in a podcast conversation because it can kind of go wherever. So let's pick up on human-to-human connection. I think that'd be good because that also ties into VAs, but it's also the podcasting side.
And in the in the podcasting realm, I think people think they're going to be able to monetize a podcast after 20 episodes, and it becomes this passive income vehicle, and that's generally not the case. But having human to human connection is a big piece of it, which is again why I typically loathe virtual podcasts. There's space for it if it's the right venue and if they're very big on front loading the tech and the expectations there for the guest who's remote. But being able to create business relationships, to be able to network with folks just by being in the same room with them is really the prime way you're going to monetize a podcast. Here we are.
That's exactly the way I've done it. Yeah. It's about relationship building. And then, the content is almost a byproduct of what I'm doing.
But the byproduct of that content, not just for you, but for your guests, and depending on which industry they're in, is a marketing vehicle for your guest.
If it's properly optimized,
Absolutely.
Right? And I think this is the piece that, before we got hit with the fire alarm, I was thinking about that people don't understand if you're going to get into podcasting, it can work against you if you do not do it correctly.
Yeah.
Really, the extra SEO stuff is awesome, but if you're going to create a YouTube channel and you're going to have 4 episodes up there and you stop and start, that works against you. Maybe not right away, but 6 months, a year, 3 years from now, somebody goes to check you out and they go to your YouTube channel and you posted 4 things and you haven't done anything in 3 years. And they're like, that doesn't say, it's almost better to not have that YouTube channel because it shows that you kind of that stop and start mentality, or you're not really like focused and precise on what you're doing.
Consistency.
You're not following through on it. I think getting into podcasting is something people should take seriously and just kind of slow your roll a minute, make sure you're doing it right, make sure you have the proper, this is my goal, this is what I'm trying to accomplish, and then build the rest of the stuff around it. But I'm guilty of not doing the SEO stuff to the extent that I should be doing it.
Sure. And there's so much you can do with video podcasting specifically, not the audio-only traditional channels, basically radio at that point. There's so much more you can do with podcasting, and we've gotten a lot more deliberate. I'm involved in a few podcasts. One of the ones that we have in-house is While Supplies Last, the marketing podcast.
That's a good name.
Thank you. Marketing team put it together. So originally, as a business owner, I wanted to build that as an opportunity for them to have spirit decor, get behind a mic and a camera, understand the consumer side of the house, as a podcast host, what that looks like. Or changing it into a marketing vehicle and an opportunity to build relationships, not just with our target clients, but with other marketing companies. We have marketing professionals in every 2 weeks, and we put that out on a bi-weekly basis. I'm going to be a host on that one a little bit more frequently as well, which is great. But
gets that Matt Nelson name out there over and over and over again.
Yeah, I need to, right? And that's a big part of it. I've done a little bit more, and I'm one of those I recognize. One of my biggest weaknesses has been public speaking. So I put myself against the fire in that a lot more often. I just did a panel speak last week on marketing, of course, but I'm trying to do that more often, which is a very different skill set than being behind a mic and a camera. But one of the things I noticed, you can go to a networking event, you can be the speaker of interest at that networking event, and you can build relationships. Hopefully it's not just business card swapping, but it's genuine referral partnerships and understanding each other in business. But you can only do that so often, right? Any given day. You could go to 20 networking events in a day and hopefully build a relationship that lasts out of that. Or you could do that in the virtual sense. You could come up through a podcast and you could potentially have, thousands of impressions on your content and your words per day for a prolonged period of time. And when you've got a consistent basis where you're showing up at 3:00 traffic or whatever the case is, and people are familiar with your brand and your messaging and they want to tune into that, all you're doing is shortening the amount of time you've got to focus on one-to-one the sales piece of that. If it's somebody you're, putting in lead gen.
So I wrote something down, network funnel.
Mm-hmm.
So I've done a lot of networking at a pretty decent level, I think. I mean, we're always looking to get better, but I've done it at a pretty decent level. What happens is you run out of time, and then you're not getting in front of the people you need to get in front of often enough.
Yeah.
So this is where content generation helps, right? Because if they're on social media, then they're going to see you, and I get that feedback. And, Mark, I see you all the time on social media. And that's what we're going for, right? We're looking to do that. But also building out the relationships, which can't be done over social media typically. You've got to do something else. So I rolled in, there's a place here in San Antonio called Top Golf.
Yeah.
And, the goal, which, November and December aren't the best months to do that in, but the goal is to once a month have a get-together where key people bring them together. So, obviously I do some referral groups. I've got a couple of those I'm involved in. Provisors is one, which is really, really good. B&I, of course, has been amazing for me. I mean, the ROI is astronomical for that. I had a good laugh. Jennifer, my wife, was asking, we going to do B&I next year? I'm like, well, what's the ROI? 6-figure ROI. And I'm like, yeah, that's kind of a no-brainer, right? But it's a hell of an opportunity to start making relationships across the country. But again, there's only so much time you have to do that. So is there a particular strategy, since you brought up networking, is there a particular strategy that you're using to build out that network funnel?
Yeah, so yes, right? For any given client, it's going to be a little bit different in terms of that strategy. For us, if we take the example of our podcast, While Supplies Last, the marketing podcast, we're building relationships with other local marketing companies who might be referral partners because, again, we may not do the TikTok dances. We may not be doing influencer marketing, or we may not be doing a certain type of email marketing for a client. But we may have an existing client who needs that service. We have, the one that's dropping soon is our one that we've got in the hopper right now is Christy from Coasis Media. And they're a video production company. They do a lot of other channels in terms of marketing as well. They're located downtown. They're a client of ours because their clients down at Make Ready Market needed some direct mail, which happens to be one of our core services. But we built out that relationship with them for a couple of years now to get to that point. Had they been on our podcast sooner, we probably could have built out that relationship a lot quicker. So there is a strategy to be had there.
I love that strategy too.
Yeah.
I just think it's phenomenal because people want to talk about themselves and their business.
It's true. And what you were talking about before, you may have somebody come up to you at a networking event. You've never seen them before. And they're like, hey, Mark, love your podcast. Let's talk business. I tune in every week. Thanks so much. That's a parasocial relationship. And that's where, from a behavioral science standpoint, you've got somebody who feels like they know the person on the other side of the screen, and you've never met them. And from a sales perspective, that does so much more in shortening that funnel, as well as networking. And that's where I think the real opportunity lies.
That's true influence marketing right there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and which is an interesting thing for me to do and to build. I mean, I've been at it almost 3 years now on the podcast, and it's a bit of a longer road. Maybe it's because maybe I'm not as charismatic as I think I am, or the road's really longer than we realize, and then you start to spike at some point. But it's certainly a fun game to play. But, back to relationship building, you're doing a lot of B2B partnership type situations. It sounds like you like those strategic alliances set up more so maybe than targeting B2C. I know B2B is pretty much your, but you know what I mean? This is a layered B2B versus B2C. Yeah. I'm saying like your B2C is actually a business. Your consumer is your business. Mm-hmm. But you're also looking for the partnerships. So it's layered in that aspect.
And I love it when you can do that for a couple of reasons. But the biggest reason I really enjoy that is having those strategic partnerships is if we're not in the business to do something and we're not saying yes to everything just so we can get the cash flow, at the end of the day, we're doing a service to our would-be customer, right? If we're pointing them in the right direction of somebody who can solve that solution for a profit for them, that's the best thing that you can do for somebody. And you're building that know, like, and trust factor much, much easier, as well as those referral partnerships.
So let's do something a little bit more pointed right now. Give me like your top list. I'm not going to say a number, but like your top list of mistakes that businesses are making with respect to their approach to podcasting, because you've been in it a while now. I mean, you run a business around this. You've got plenty of clients. So what are some of the mistakes people are making, businesses are making when they go to start a podcast that they need to be thinking about?
Sure. I think number one that I see most often is if it's an individual and they feel like they want to be an individual hosting a podcast. I'm just going to talk to the camera for an hour once a week. Nothing against it, but if you're not charismatic, if you don't have the right story to tell, if you're not compelling enough, and most people aren't, just to be honest, you're not going to build a relationship with people. And if you are, it's going to take a long time to build that audience. You've done it right organically, because every Monday you're in here like clockwork, and you've got a number of people, and you're inheriting an audience from those people every time. Because every time somebody comes in here, it doesn't matter if it's Brandy Joe Newman in finance or anybody else, they're going to tell their network of folks or their family at minimum, hey, I'll be, the show's going to drop in 2 weeks. Be sure and tune in. Or once it does drop, they're going to be sharing it. Right? That's how you inherit an audience. So number one biggest mistake is doing a solo podcast and talking at people as opposed to letting somebody voyeuristically tune in to a conversation that's a genuine conversation that's happening. That's the biggest one. Second is consistency and frequency. I talked about Wah Supplies last, the marketing podcast, and the original intent was let my people have some time to understand, from the consumer aspect, what that looks like, but also build Spirit de Core. That's great, but it's not going to be a successful podcast unless you have the consistency. It wasn't until a couple of months ago we were like, okay, bi-weekly at minimum, we're going to drop a podcast. And it's going to be very pointed. It's going to be strategic. It's going to be about this particular marketing channel. It's going to be an add value for small business owners as a secondary audience, right? But not having that consistency or not maintaining it is a huge one. We had a client in here for over 6 months, and we worked with them from a consultation standpoint of, content strategy, what they can do. And they built up an audience of almost 1,000. And then, I actually told them out of branding, they'd do better off in their own space. They have a beautiful studio in the beauty space. They built their own podcast studio for that reason. And I gave them that because I felt like for their business model, it would be perfect. And they could build it out the way they liked it. This isn't a beauty studio, right? Although we do have beauty podcasts. Unfortunately, they took such a long break on that. In between when they left here and they started back up in their podcast, they took, I want to say, a 2 or 3 month break, but their audience just dropped and it fell off. So that's what happens when people take a break in a podcast. And that's why, in addition to consistency, my other one is being deliberate with your content strategy and building up content before you start distributing it. That'd probably be the third one.
So putting, 4 in a can at a minimum, right?
Absolutely.
So that you're a month ahead or whatever else. Yeah, that's interesting. In fact, that actually made me think about, because we got some breaks, obviously, with the holidays coming up, but maybe even spreading those out to where we're going to drop at least one every week, even through that time, is a good idea. I don't typically do that. I like to drop everything on a Monday, right afterwards. But, yeah, very, very good. Now, so relationship building, obviously something we can do inside the podcast studio. Content generation, very, very good because it's ongoing 24/7, 365, all awesome. But what else when it comes to podcasting as we're looking towards 2025? What's something people aren't thinking about with podcasts? Is there anything new that is an added benefit that you see kind of is now and maybe coming? I mean, I know AI is the big thing, but is there an aspect that you haven't talked about yet with respect to podcasting that you think is something, a huge reason to get involved with it?
I think for me, the biggest one is staying in tune with what new tools and software is out there.
So relevance.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
You're timely and you're relevant. And that's a very, very good point. That's one of the reasons why, people are doing their due diligence on social media. This is a huge thing. You see it all the time in the trades, because I'm kind of around the trades a little bit more often. But you'll check, and they haven't posted anything since September of 2023, right? Mm-hmm. That's a negative. We talked about this for the YouTube channel, but it's also a negative there. People are looking to see, are you relevant in your space? And that's almost a requirement now. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things you're talking about, there's an entrepreneur. He's a British Aussie, so he's from Australia, but he thrives in Great Britain, in the UK. Daniel Priestley. He talks a lot about marketing, but he talks a lot about content, and he's a guest on a billion podcasts. He's got a lot of content out there as well. But one of the things he recommends, and I agree with from a social media standpoint, is signposting. So if you're going to be engaged on LinkedIn and Instagram, just as an example, those are going to be your two primary ones because you're a small business. You're not pulling the levers of being able to use currency arbitrage and get VAs involved to be able to work with you and build up a robust social media following. If you're not doing that and you're doing everything on your own, at least get on 4 platforms and operate on 2 of them. But on the other 2, be deliberate about your message. Hey, I'm not usually here. You may find me on LinkedIn the most. So you're not having that September of 2023 as the last post without at least an explanation.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's fair enough, right?
Mm-hmm.
But reposting that content, Twitter's an area that I'm not real active on, is Twitter, for a lot of reasons. But it's something that I need to take a better look at, I think, now that it seems like the whole shadow banning and all of that, everything's just, the temperature's gone down just a little bit, I think, on social media. All right, cool. So the relevance is super important. The amount of content that one podcast can create is tremendous. An hour-long podcast can do so much. Mm-hmm. When your clients come in, and is that part of your coaching that you do with them on, hey, this is in that conversation? Walk me through.
Sure.
If I'm going to get into podcasting with you, what are the high points you're gonna hit with me to make sure that I get maximum value? And also, you're interviewing me to make sure that I'm a good fit.
Yeah, because we've moved again away from the podcast studio as a rental model for a few reasons, and one of them is nothing against Peerspace as a platform, but you'll have a lot of value shoppers who are going to be the next Joe Rogan because they just know their content's going to hit, and they want that passive income from podcasting. We're not looking to necessarily do business with them, and there might be a better studio for them, unless it's super compelling and they've got really good pitch. But that's my conversation with them, is really feeling that out. But understanding, because for the most part, everybody who's in here as a podcaster has a business or is involved in business somehow. But understanding how that correlates with what they're doing and making sure that their branding and their messaging actually works for them. Because they might have an idea, just like in marketing or any of our traditional marketing clients who aren't necessarily podcasters, they might have an idea of what they want to do, but it might not be the best idea or use of their money from a marketing channel perspective.
If you had somebody that was like, hey, I want to be an influencer and I want to use podcasting as one of the ways to do that. Because, there's celebrities here in town, right? There's sports players. There's bound to be people that would be like, I want to be an influencer. And podcasting is a great way to really, in my opinion, to showcase that.
Yeah.
If somebody wanted to do that, is that something you feel like you would be a good fit to help them get there, or would you send them someplace else?
Yes and no. I think it depends on the definition of influencer. Is it going to be, no offense to my generation, millennial or below, Gen Z, is it the definition of influencer that I just have a lot of following and I can have my Louis Vuitton handbag and, make money from that? Is that your influencer? Or is it a key person of influence who is shining the light on not necessarily themselves, but using their content to be able to shine the light on something and potentially monetizing it that way?
It could be a football player,
a
local football player, for example. And because there's key components to leveraging podcasting correctly that they're probably not going to get if they just have a social media marketing company that's doing their stuff for them, doing their engagements, doing their postings, and optimizing everything, which is all super valuable. But if they want to roll podcasting into it and they want to have cool conversations, is that something they can get done with you? Can they get that? Because and I know this, there's scheduling, there's, you know what I mean? There's planning, there's prep, there's the whole thing. Would you be able to handle that kind of a situation for somebody who wanted to go, say, from 200,000 followers to 500,000 followers?
Yeah, and I think that's where the virtual assistants, leveraging human capital systems and processes all comes in. So short answer, yes, because of those reasons. An individual managing their own calendar, an individual managing their own business, their own content, they're not going to be able to keep up if they're going to want to build an audience. Being able to have those conversations by phone or by email, getting guests on your podcasts, that's an art. And you know this better than anybody because you've got schedulers who do this as a job. You've got, people who are in charge of your social media who do this as a job. Same thing. You've got to have a crew behind you who's able to do that. And the best way to do that is really leveraging virtual assistants or at least a good, solid, tried and true system or process.
Right. I watched a documentary, Name, Image, and Likeness. It was about I guess it was in 2020 or 2021, Supreme Court ruled that, college athletes could basically earn money from their NIL. And that was the whole thing. Well, I watched this one lady, she's like hugely successful at it. Her sister was managing her stuff for her, right? Mm-hmm. The talent, they are the ones in front of the camera creating the whatever, right? But as far as scheduling everything that needed to be done with that and then post-production of that and distribution of that was all handled by somebody else.
Yeah.
The comments, all that kind of stuff, they would check it every once in a while, but they had other people doing this. And I think that's the reality of the situation, the current situation. So that's what I'm thinking, like if somebody wanted to do that, coming to your business to be able to get all of that extra stuff done, because it's more than just doing a podcast, it's everything else that's with it, that you can help them have a really successful ongoing podcast that is maximized every aspect of value that comes out of that.
Yeah. That's the way to do it. You have to optimize it, and you have to be able to leverage other people's human capital and systems and processes.
But from their perspective, they're just hire you guys as that service.
Absolutely.
All right. So when it comes to leveraging VAs to grow the business out, this is one of my favorite topics to talk about because I don't think people really understand that when you can tap into a global talent pool and you can reduce your costs, and work ethic's always, it's always a thing. You can argue whether work ethic is better somewhere else or not or whatever. But the reality is when you have 300 people applying for a position as opposed to biting, scratching, and clawing to get 6, you probably got a better chance to get some really good people into, your business. So I know you're building stuff out. I know you're looking to scale as you grow out, and virtual assistants are a part of something you've been doing for a while. What are the high points for you when it comes to using a virtual assistant within your businesses?
Yeah, so take the translation business, for example. The big part of the labor there is the actual skill set of being able to translate something. And we rely on a network of freelance translators worldwide. That's separate altogether from the virtual assistants. The business itself is run by virtual assistants who are able to man and staff the phone calls, right? There's a bilingual element to that. It's a translation business itself. The vast majority of our business is related to 2 different language pairs. Language pair example being English to Spanish or Spanish to English. Those are 2 different language pairs. Generally, people will want things translated to their native language or to the actual target language. And that's where having that bilingual capability really comes into play from a rapport building standpoint. So you're leveraging multilingual talent, which is a big part of it. But also, if you take away the multilingual component altogether, just think about, you're potentially paying somebody in their native country what a surgeon might be paid in their country to do something that you'd pay somebody else here a lot more to do. They're going to be wanting to jump through hoops to execute on that particular, skill set for your brand on behalf of your brand. So that's where, that currency arbitrage, as you'd call it, really comes into play. And, being able to leverage having a global talent pool as opposed to what's just in your zip code and what they might be able to do for you.
Yeah, talent we're always looking for good talent, right? And I had mentioned before, we post a job, we get hundreds of applications, and we have to sort through those. It's quite the labor to do that, but it's pretty cool as opposed to getting 6 people. Mm-hmm. And you know what I mean? 3 aren't qualified. One's got a bad attitude or just not going to gel right. Yeah. And then you got maybe your last 2 that you kind of decide if you can even find the right person. But I like having a big pool of clients or applicants to pull from. Cost is obviously a factor, super important because if we can get labor at $7 or $8 or $9 an hour, as opposed to out of the U.S. where we're paying 15, is kind of a starting point now. Yeah. 20 is really the cost of living. $20 an hour to have a decent lifestyle in the United States. Even then, you're probably sharing a room with somebody. So it makes it easier for us to offer our services at a much more competitive rate to our clients.
Yeah.
So has that been a big factor for you, is obviously the low cost?
Yeah, that's a big part of it, because I think, operationally for any business, you're going to have, if it's a service-based business, you're going to have finesse skill sets involved, in operating that service. And then operationally, behind the scenes, there's low-hanging fruit of cost of labor. You don't want to pay somebody $20+ an hour to do something that doesn't require $20 an hour. And that's where operationally your VAs really come into place. Having that written down, having a systematized process of who does what, and making sure that it all marries together well, is where a service like yours really comes into play.
Yeah, and look, if somebody wants to do their own hiring, that's a whole job in of itself. Not to mention, after the hiring process, there's so much more that goes on.
HR,
it's, culture to culture differences, how you engage and interact with that particular VA. As Americans, we're approach things a little bit differently than they would, say, in the Philippines.
We're a very direct culture versus the rest of the world.
That's right.
Which can be off-putting and can cause issues.
So like with our staffing company, we have a Philippine HR department so that we pay attention to those kinds of things, so that we don't do something that could mess up a potentially great relationship just because you didn't know how to handle it. And then your VA ends up ghosting you, as they say, because they don't want to re-engage. So, yeah, I love all of that. I love the flexibility. I love the turning on and off without worrying about getting sued. Of course, the low cost is really, really good. Global talent pool is really, really good. Anything outside of that you really see as a value add when it comes to virtual assistant?
I mean, that's the biggest one. Being able to leverage someone else's time and talents is the big one. And for small business owners, which is our target audience, generally speaking, that's where our passion is from the B2B standpoint. I mean, that makes the most sense. Being able to go head-to-head with bigger companies who are your competitors and being able to leverage someone else's time and talents at an affordable rate. That's the best way to do it.
It seems silly to me to pay out $48,000 a year for a position you can do for $18,000 a year.
Yeah, especially as a business owner, because I've gone through my team to get to our core team who's with me right now, who are the best, and I'll keep them with me as long as they'll stay on board, right? But we've gone through our talent, whether or not it's a 1099 freelance contractor on board or W-2. And if you're a business owner and you're paying W-2 money to include the taxes and everything else that comes with it for a U.S.-based person to execute that service for you, it can really take a toll on the business bank account. Hopefully you have a business bank account. It's not your personal.
Right.
Piercing the corporate veil, as our attorney clients would say. But a big piece of that is you're not having to wrap yourself up in a whole bunch of extra compliance and red tape that you would, a U.S. W-2 employee.
Yeah. My challenge to business owners is if you're paying somebody $40,000 plus a year for a job that can be done remotely, you need to slow down. You need to take a look at hiring a remote worker from the Philippines or Latin America at a serious fraction of the cost. If you could save $30,000 in a year by simply moving the position overseas and still get the same level of output, what are you doing? You need to look at that, because $30,000 is a lot of money for a business.
And if you want to scale and you're really hung up on, hey, I want to, I'm patriotic, I want to hire U.S. people for this, that, or the other. So make them your managers, make them your executive assistants who are your boots on the ground, who are going to help you with, X service here and there, or maybe they know your personal schedule even more than a VA does. But you're a prime example. Your VAs know your schedule, and they're able to actually optimize your schedule for you. But if you're really hung up on hiring somebody who's U.S. as an employee, hire them as an employee, but outsource those tasks that are the low-hanging fruit of the cost of their labor to be able to fully optimize them as your employee and give them the best capability that you can as an employer. And
for anybody who thinks that you're not going to be able to find that person, I would definitely challenge you on that, because like for less than $11 an hour, we've hired for one of our clients, a legal assistant whose skill level is amazing at being able to write papers and draft documents that go to clients and go to court. It's like, that's really, really high skill level for less than $11 an hour.
Yeah, it's a paralegal.
It is. So go do that. It's like, we can do that. So if we can find somebody for that much money to do that high level work, the rest of it is going to be easier. So it's all doable. So I love it when a client comes to me with what they think is a hard challenge, and then we tell them, oh, no, we got 300 people applying to that. We're screening all of those people right now. They're like, wow. And then they see the quality, and they're like, oh, my gosh, I didn't know that this could be done. Like, yeah, it can be done.
Very cool.
And you want to do a lot more of it and grow your business. That's the only kind of business I like to do. It's got to be done, using virtual talent. Nice. Is that the direction you're headed mostly too?
Yeah, for the most part. There's going to be some localized skill sets they have to have, or fulfillment processes in some businesses that have to have a local piece to it. But on the back end, I mean, that's your operational workflow, is having that virtual talent for sure.
Yeah, and the cost savings. Man,
that's it.
Like, what could I do with $30,000 extra dollars
in my business? That's marketing dollars to me, but I'm very biased in that.
Yeah. I'm thinking I could pay myself more than I'm paying myself now. You know what I mean? So, But luckily I don't have those issues. So here's another idea. If you're a business owner and you're like, you know what, I'd like to branch off in a particular direction, add a new service in. Well, here's a challenge. Hire a VA to come in as a project manager to be the lead go-to person on that project, so that you can have the mental bandwidth you need to do the overall idea and connections and whatever, but somebody else is making sure that the process mapping is done, that the SOPs are done, right? Yeah. That the timelines are set and all those things are managed. Let them build that administrative process and keep that timeline while you're building that business. That's what I'm doing right now, and I love it. And it's like, I think that could be addicting, where it's like, I'm going to look for more opportunities to do more businesses.
Patch the ship. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Stitch the parachute on the way down, is how we like to say. All right, Matt. Well, I know we could go on for a lot longer, and of course we got interrupted by a couple of alarms in here. But if folks want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Best way is probably LinkedIn in terms of social media. Email me at matt, at peachtreerosemarketing.com. But LinkedIn, I'm Matt Nelson on LinkedIn. I'm also on Instagram sometimes. Official Matt Nelson is the...
I love it.
You got to take it. Yeah.
I love it. I need to do that for mine. Official Marc Ebinger.
Yeah. Well, I was going to just do Matt Nelson, but there's already a Matt Nelson. So I'm the official Matt Nelson. Yeah.
Okay.
Enjoy.
Love that. All right. Is there a phone number that they can call to?
For Peachtree Rose Marketing, you can reach out to 210-390-6404. For Peachtree Rose Translations, 210-390-3933.
Love that, man. Always a pleasure, man. I love what you're doing. 5 years from now, who knows where you're going to be, but I'm going to be watching that journey as you go. So I'm glad that we know each other.
Likewise.
All right, as we wrap up the show, quick reminder, check out our latest podcast and catch video version of the show anytime by visiting our website at satalkradio.com. That's going to be it for this one. You guys have a great week, and we'll see you on the next one.